She followed her heart across the ocean, leaving behind a comfortable life in America for a whirlwind romance on the high seas. But what began as a fairy tale turned into one of the most chilling true crime cases in international headlines. Julie Scully, a beautiful mother and former model, vanished after traveling to Greece with the man she believed was her soulmate, only to meet a gruesome end at his hands. How did love blind her to the red flags? And why did no one stop him before it was too late? Let's uncover the heartbreaking truth behind the murder that shocked 2 continents. Julie Marie Scully, an American woman, gave up everything to pursue love. But just a few months later, her body was found in a horrific state in a remote lake in Turkey. What turned her once beautiful life into an international sensation? Let's follow her case today. Julie was the daughter of Julia and John Scully. To understand her story better, let's take a look at her parents' background. Julia was born in 1943 on an Indian reservation in New Mexico, home to the second-largest Native American tribe in the United States. Life on the reservation was extremely challenging. There was no electricity or running water, and job opportunities were limited. Due to widespread alcoholism, many residents turned to substance abuse as a coping mechanism. At the age of 12, Julia's parents sent her to a boarding school to help her learn English and adapt to life outside the reservation. After moving to the city, she began to fit in with average American society and found work at a mental health facility. However, she eventually became addicted to substances. Later, Julia met a police officer named John. They got married just 2 days before the first anniversary of their meeting. John took a job as a patrolman in one of the most dangerous areas of North Philadelphia. In January 1969, Julia became pregnant, and they welcomed their daughter, Julie. As Julie grew, she formed a very close bond with her father. Relatives noted that she would do anything to earn his approval. Father and daughter spent a lot of time together fishing, while Julia often felt sidelined within the family. During this time, she struggled with feelings of being an outsider. Although Julia hid her substance addiction, her erratic behavior raised concerns among those around her. Things worsened as Julia began using more potent illegal substances. Despite this, on November 10, 1969, Julie's brother John Patrick Scully was born. The new baby quickly became the center of attention, leaving Julie feeling unloved and neglected. Meanwhile, Julia's substance abuse continued, and she fell into a deep depression. In 1973, overwhelmed, she took an entire bottle of sleeping pills. Fortunately, John found her in time, administered first aid, and called for medical help. Julia was revived, but the family now had to confront the reality of her addiction. The situation deteriorated further, and Julia became a shell of her former self. Soon after, Julia attempted self-harm again, due to her ongoing depression, but once again, she was saved. The issues between her parents did not go unnoticed by their children, especially Julie, who was 9 years old at the time. During her birthday party, friends gathered to celebrate. But in the middle of the festivities, John left to meet his mistress. He had been having an affair for a while, seeing it as an escape from his growing resentment toward his dependent wife. He stayed with Julia only for the sake of the children. During the party, the mistress arrived at their home to pick John up, and Julie saw them leaving together. He seemed completely unconcerned that his secret was now out in the open. This revelation hit Julie hard, and Julia began blaming herself for the family's turmoil. She struggled to understand what was really happening. Once an excellent student, Julie's grades fell to a C average. John then decided to transfer her to a new school in Kensington there. Julie, bright and beautiful, became very popular, but also fell in with the wrong crowd. She started skipping school, and her academic performance continued to decline. By this time, she was just 12 years old, but already looked older, attracting the attention of many boys. All of this was worsened by the fact that the family lived in a disadvantaged area making her parents increasingly afraid for Julie's future, fearing she could fall victim to addiction. One evening, Julie's friends were supposed to spend the night, but when Julia checked on them, the girls were missing. Concerned, Julia contacted emergency services, and the police eventually located them in downtown Philadelphia. Julie's relationship with her mother deteriorated further, resulting in frequent arguments. Her rebellious behavior also troubled her father. Julia entered treatment for her addiction. During her absence, the home environment became more peaceful. However, despite Julie's early attempts to please her father, her rebellious behavior intensified. She continued skipping classes and performing poorly in school due to spending more time with friends. When John learned of this, he was very upset. At the age of 14, Julie informed her father that she wanted to drop out of school, a decision likely driven by her feelings of being overlooked by her parents. She was attractive and often the center of attention at parties, which led her to prioritize socializing over earning her father's approval. By the age of 14, Julie had begun engaging in romantic relationships. After graduating from high school, her parents started considering her future and whether she had any special educational needs. John helped her gain admission to a prestigious engineering school known for its rigorous selection process. He personally spoke to the director to ensure she would be accepted without competition, emphasizing her indigenous heritage, which he hoped would give her an advantage. In the fall of 1983, his efforts paid off, and Julie enrolled in the engineering program. Meanwhile, her brother took a different path and joined the Navy as soon as he turned 16. During this time, Julie decided she was satisfied with her life and left school to pursue financial independence. She began working and soon met a boyfriend who was 6 years older than her. Their relationship progressed quickly, and they married in November 1985, just a few months before Julie turned 18. Although the marriage provided her with emotional and financial stability, the union was kept secret even from her father. When John eventually found out, he supported the marriage, believing it was a better choice for Julie than staying with a dependent parent. Unfortunately, the marriage ended in 1988, and Julie had to move back in with her mother. Despite finding a new job, she did not contribute to the household expenses. Julie became more striking in appearance, often attracting attention whenever she was out in public. Many people mistook her for a model and frequently asked if she was one. Over time, she began to use her looks to her advantage. Although she appeared confident, she felt fragile and emotionally vulnerable, longing for lasting love, but only finding short-lived relationships. She received frequent invitations to events and social outings. This continued in July 1989, when she attended an upscale party at a yacht owners club. There she met Tim Nist, a man 11 years her senior. He was a successful businessman who owned his own yacht. In the early 1980s, he had founded a landscape design company that thrived during the U.S. real estate boom. Julie and Tim's relationship progressed quickly, but it soon became clear that Julie was very possessive one day. When Tim was at a bar with another woman, Julie showed up unexpectedly and struck him, leaving a bruise on his face. She also confronted the woman, who turned out to be Tim's longtime secretary and an employee simply assisting with business matters. Although the situation was tense, it was eventually resolved. Julie also aspired to become a model and saw an advertisement for a beauty contest in a newspaper. Eager to participate, she and Tim gathered her best photos and submitted them to the magazine hosting the contest. Unfortunately, they later discovered that the contest was a scam. The magazine had used fake advertisements to collect free photos for their men's section, which appeared on the back pages. One day, Tim arrived at his office to find his secretary absent. To his surprise, Julie was sitting at her desk with a friendly smile, claiming the secretary would no longer be working there and that she had taken over the role. This arrangement allowed Julie to work from home, giving her both flexibility and financial independence. Meanwhile, she kept checking her email in hopes of receiving a response from another magazine about the beauty pageant. But no replies came, which left her frustrated. Eventually feeling deceived and overlooked, she went to the magazine's office and confronted the editor, demanding an explanation for the lack of recognition for her supposed win. In the end, the editor accepted her photos and promised to include them in the next issue. Julie shared her experience with others and began preparing for the competition, which was later held at an elite hotel. 12 finalists participated, including Julie. Unfortunately, the judges selected other contestants, and only one person voted in her favor. Despite this setback, Julie formed a friendship with Cheryl Chouplis Hood, the magazine's editor, and soon became the face of the publication, appearing on billboards throughout the city. This exposure increased her popularity and led to numerous modeling opportunities. Julie quickly gained fame, and her career flourished until the fall of 1990. She continued working with SEMA while winning awards in smaller beauty contests. However, she struggled to achieve success on larger stages. On November 16, 1991, Julie married Tim at the age of 23. They enjoyed a comfortable lifestyle and lived without financial limitations until 1997. Julie's modeling career continued to grow, bringing in more income and TV appearances. However, she also began to struggle with alcohol misuse. Their marriage had its ups and downs, but overall, they shared love and mutual understanding. Tim wanted children, and they had the financial means to support a family. But Julie was hesitant, fearing motherhood might interfere with her modeling career. In February 1995, she became pregnant. Despite friends' concerns, she continued to drink and smoke during this period. On November 26, 1996, she gave birth to a daughter named Katie, which profoundly changed her life, a change Julie embraced. During this time, Julia had overcome her addiction and began actively supporting her granddaughter. However, disagreements over parenting methods led to frequent arguments. Julie soon developed postpartum depression, feeling disheartened by the changes in her body following pregnancy. She became increasingly withdrawn and made little effort to return to her former self. Around the same time, her relationship with Tim began to deteriorate, especially in April of that year. The couple sought help from a family psychologist. Julie felt the therapist favored Tim, although the therapist was actually trying to help her face her emotional struggles and unresolved trauma. Ultimately, the psychologist concluded that Tim wasn't spending enough time with Julie, which put their marriage at risk. Feeling isolated, Julie began reconnecting with friends. On November 1st, she returned home intoxicated. That year marked the 7th anniversary of Tim's annual cruise tradition, which they had upheld since their wedding. To celebrate the upcoming Christmas holidays, they decided to take the trip earlier than usual. The cruise was meant to strengthen their relationship. They left Katie with her grandparents and flew to San Juan, Puerto Rico, where they boarded the ship. Almost immediately, Julie caught the attention of George Skiadopoulos, a crew member working in the ship's engineering department. Although he held a low-ranking position, he introduced himself as the ship's captain. The next day, he made a bet with a friend that he could begin a romantic relationship with Julie. At just 22 years old and newly graduated, George was at the start of his engineering career. But he appeared polished and mature enough to convince Julie. He falsely claimed to be 28 and exaggerated his accomplishments to impress her. Julie, who was 29 at the time, quickly became close to George. Tim noticed their interactions, but was used to Julie being friendly with strangers, so he didn't think much of it and felt no jealousy. Before a party, George offered to give Julie a private tour of the engine room. During the tour, they shared a kiss, but nothing further happened. When Julie returned home, she confided in a family friend about her feelings, believing it was just a fleeting attraction and assuming she would never see George again. However, not long after, George sent Julie a seemingly innocent letter, and they began talking on the phone daily. He tried to convince her that Tim wasn't the right partner for her, Although Julie didn't hide the phone calls, Tim caught her speaking with George a few times, but chose to trust her, never questioning the nature of their conversations. Julie felt deeply conflicted, torn between the stability of her family and the excitement of a new connection with a younger man she increasingly missed. This emotional turmoil gradually created more distance between her and both her husband and daughter. Noticing the change in her behavior, Tim grew concerned and wanted to mend their relationship. On January 3, 1941, he planned a surprise birthday party for her 30th birthday. The celebration went well with many friends attending. During the party, Julie requested another cruise as a gift, specifying a particular ship and date. Unaware of her true intentions to meet George again, Tim agreed to her request. On February 13th, Julie went on a cruise where she met George. After sharing some intimate moments with him, she returned home and excitedly shared her experience with her friend Tony, who was also Katie's godfather. Although Tony was trustworthy, it was hard for him to keep such a secret. Feeling a deep longing for George, Julie decided to visit him secretly. She framed the trip as a vacation with her mother and daughter. Julie confided in her mother about the secret relationship which led to disapproval, but it didn't stop her. Initially, the plan was for Julie, Julia, and Katie to go to Florida together. However, by March 26th, she left them behind and traveled to Puerto Rico, where she betrayed her husband's love. Upon returning, Julie began communicating more openly with George. She frequently talked to him on the phone, sent flirty love letters via email, and even created a video sharing snippets of her life. She did all of this without hiding it from Tim, with whom she still lived, using her husband's income. She started going to parties and drinking regularly. Tim noticed the changes and suggested that they see a family psychologist after 7 years of marriage. One day, Julie expressed her desire to separate from Tim, but he opposed the idea. She owned a share in his business, which was generating about $1 million annually. Julie was in dire need of finances, as George was preparing for military service, which in Greece lasts 20 months. She attempted to help George obtain a visa to the U.S., but she could no longer afford it. Struggling emotionally, she began taking antidepressants, which angered George. He forbade her from continuing the medication. Wanting to impress her new boyfriend, Julie decided to get in shape. However, she suffered from insomnia due to sleeping pills and other strong medications, which caused her to lose about 10 kilos. She hoped to return to modeling to earn money, but George was jealous and opposed her pursuing that career. Consequently, Julie abandoned her plans. No one supported her relationship with the Greek man, not even Cheryl, who had once shown interest in her. In a separate incident, Tim was unable to access a project document. When Julie refused to let him into her room, he had to call the police for assistance. Despite her resistance, he retrieved what he needed for work. Julie became paranoid, believing Tim had hired a detective to spy on her. Tension in the household escalated, and a divorce seemed inevitable. By midsummer, George and Julie secretly got engaged while in the United States. Although she didn't hide her intention to move to Greece, the engagement was kept secret. Around this time, Tim began receiving monthly phone bills with $67 charges for international calls. Eventually, he discovered Julie's infidelity with an engineer from a cruise ship, and that she had been communicating with him behind his back. This revelation made Tim furious, and he decided to expedite the divorce to avoid further complications. In response, Julie tried to limit Tim's communication with Katie, aiming for full custody, so she could leave the country without legal obstacles, something Tim strongly opposed. While they were trying to resolve their issues, George informed Julie that he had quit his job and planned to visit her in New Jersey. At this point, Julie was under significant stress from her conflicts with Tim, even experiencing hair loss. However, she believed the stress was caused by her separation from George. She became increasingly paranoid and jealous, demanding constant communication and obsessing over other women in George's life. When George arrived in New Jersey, their relationship became increasingly chaotic. He frequently asked Julie for money, pressuring her to spend beyond her means. As a result, she was forced to take money from Tim, all while severely restricting his communication with their daughter. Tim went weeks without seeing Katie, which led to growing frustration. Meanwhile, George continually deceived Julie about his financial status and employment situation. It was shocking how unattractive and manipulative this man was. Yet the beautiful Julie, who had once lived a well-established life, seemed completely devoted to him, even willing to sacrifice everything. Julie's friends and family were deeply puzzled by her behavior. They urged her to reconsider her feelings, unable to understand why she had fallen for a bald, unemployed man with poor hygiene, rotten teeth, and a jealous, controlling nature. Despite their concerns, Julie remained infatuated. She even planned to use her divorce settlement to fund a professional hair transplant for George and to fix her own dental issues. When Tim learned about her intentions, he was outraged, especially because he believed she was entangling Katie in this unhealthy relationship. He threatened that if she tried to leave, he would take full custody and she would never see Katie again. This threat appeared to temporarily dampen Julie's enthusiasm. She told friends that she had ended things with George, but it turned out to be only a brief setback. A few weeks later, she traveled to Greece with George to further their relationship. While in Greece, Julie met George's parents and spent the weekend with them. Due to their conservative religious views, Julie was forced to hide the fact that she was still married, had a child, and had worked as a model. When she returned home, she was filled with dreams of a future with George. On December 1st, she left Tim and their shared home, and also left Katie checking into a hotel. After consuming a significant amount of psychoactive drugs, she traveled to Greece on December 8, 1998. While there, she and George began planning their wedding and life together. George convinced her to open a joint bank account, claiming she would need his help navigating the language barrier, swayed by love. Julie deposited $80,000 into the account and left an additional $18,000 in cash for their living expenses. That was all the money she had. Then she vanished without a trace. On January 8th, George called one of Julie's friends to report that she was missing. He claimed they were supposed to meet at a McDonald's for a snack, but she never showed up despite him waiting for hours. At the time, neither of them had mobile phones, which made communication difficult. After a long wait, George said he contacted the police to report her disappearance. Shortly before vanishing, Julie had called her friend to say how much she missed Katie and to confide that she was having problems with George. The friend believed Julie was on the verge of leaving him and returning to the U.S. However, Julie never came back. George's call raised concerns. He told the friend that Julie had left her passport in the car and that the police had taken it. But he later claimed he couldn't locate the officer who had confiscated the document, which made his story appear suspicious. The friend, alarmed by this, reached out to Tim, who was the only one capable of taking immediate action. Tim quickly realized something was wrong. Julie had last contacted her family on January 7th, and no one had heard from her since Julie's mother described George as pathetic, not only unattractive, but also lacking in self-control. There had been a disturbing incident during an argument George had yelled at. Julie grabbed her by the throat and slammed her against a wall. He only released her when he heard someone threaten to call the police. Julie attempted to end the relationship after that. She called the authorities, and George was eventually deported. Yet despite everything, Julie later traveled back to Greece to support George. She defended him at every turn, even taking responsibility for the assault herself. When she learned that Julie was missing, Julia immediately suspected that her daughter's boyfriend was involved in the disappearance. George pretended to help with the search. During this time, Julie's family tried to contact the American embassy in Athens, but they faced a significant language barrier, as no one at the Greek police stations involved in the investigation spoke English. In the United States, the FBI became involved in the case. It was revealed that Julie's passport had been in George's possession the entire time, even though he initially claimed he had found it later. Once George discovered that the FBI was now investigating, he changed his story, saying Julie's documents had been stolen. His behavior became increasingly suspicious. He attempted to withdraw money from their joint account, but was unsuccessful. The couple had been scheduled to marry on January 23, 1999. During this period, news outlets began covering the story of the missing American woman. George grew agitated during a phone call with Julie's friend, who had alerted the media insisting on his innocence. He even gave statements to the press and participated in interviews to defend himself. 16 days later, George, now the main suspect, was in the interrogation room. He initially repeated the story he had told the media. However, after 4 hours of questioning, the police obtained a confession he admitted to killing Julie. Though he claimed it had been an accident, George appeared genuinely remorseful, even shedding tears during the interrogation. Still, his account was riddled with inconsistencies. At times, he insisted that Julie had not disappeared, only to later admit guilt and then deny any involvement again. George explained that after moving to Greece, Julie quickly became unhappy and missed her home. She expressed a strong desire to return, and despite his attempts to comfort her, her distress deepened, which worried him. In the days leading up to her disappearance, she was constantly in tears. Additionally, George's mother had discovered that Julie had an ex-husband and a daughter in the United States, and this revelation disgusted her. She openly expressed her disapproval, and George was ultimately persuaded by his mother to end the relationship with Julie, whom she viewed as having a complicated past. Their relationship was fraught with arguments, and they were eventually evicted from their hotel due to ongoing conflicts. George escalated the situation further by isolating Julie from her family and friends and physically abusing her. It later became apparent that George's mother struggled with schizophrenia and required frequent hospitalization. Many of her issues seem to have been passed on to George, who exhibited signs of narcissism and arrogance. He displayed manipulative tendencies, frequently withdrawing at the slightest disagreement and becoming violent toward Julie. There was also a troubling incident involving George's mother, who had a badly injured hand. She claimed she had accidentally cut herself. Despite the abuse, Julie stayed in the relationship. On January 8, 1999, the couple took a long drive to Athens. As they traveled along a remote 2-lane highway, a calm conversation escalated into a heated argument. George pulled over in a deserted area far from any other traffic. He got out of the car and attacked Julie, choking her to silence her screams. Later, George told police that it felt as though he were watching the scene from outside his body. He claimed to feel powerless and unable to stop until Julie showed no signs of life. Although he insisted the attack lasted only a few seconds, forensic experts stated that strangulation typically takes at least 3 minutes. Afterward, George said he was in shock and contemplated burning Julie's body and scattering her ashes into the sea from a nearby cliff before jumping himself. In the end, he abandoned this plan. Instead, George found himself in an interrogation room where his guilt was ultimately revealed. He claimed he had attempted to take his own life using an air gun by jumping in front of a truck and through an overdose of medication, but all efforts were unsuccessful. Following the murder, he treated Julie's body with disturbing indifference. He placed her in the trunk of his car and drove to the nearest gas station, where he purchased gasoline. Returning to the scene, he dragged her body away from the road, near 2 small lakes, poured gasoline over her, and attempted to set her on fire. However, the fire failed to ignite as it had begun to rain. At one point, He considered throwing her body into the lake, but instead placed the charred remains back in the trunk and drove to his grandmother's house. There, George found a large suitcase meant for travel and decided to pack the body inside. By then, rigor mortis had set in, making it impossible to bend the body. The head wouldn't fit into the suitcase, so George resorted to severing it. He later confessed to police that he held the head by the hair and lifted it to his face. Despite being horrified by the vacant stare in her eyes, he still found her beautiful and even kissed her lips before placing her remains into the suitcase. He then burned the suitcase and discarded it in a swamp, leaving the severed head behind. Later, George traveled to Kavala and threw Julie's head into the Aegean Sea. Tim and his family were informed of George's confession 19 days after Julie's disappearance. George, Julie's lover and intended husband, led detectives to the murder site where her remains were found. Tim traveled to Greece to bring her body home. During this time, George confessed to the crime live on television. His mother suffered a stroke upon hearing of his actions. Tim's father remarked that George should have died alongside Julie. Despite the facts, several articles unfairly blamed Julie for the tragedy. Greek authorities described the murder as one of the most horrific crimes of that era. George's lawyers tried to argue insanity, citing his mother's schizophrenia as a possible explanation for his mental state. At one point, George expressed a desire for the death penalty, but Greece does not practice capital punishment. In the United States, Tim became a pillar of support for Julie's grieving family and friends. Despite Julie's infidelity, he proved to be a decent and compassionate person. Julie's friends believed that George had initially exploited her for financial gain. Upon learning that her husband was wealthy, George allegedly pressured Julie to divorce Tim and invest her settlement in his business. Before her death, Julie had realized George's true motives and decided not to invest in his ventures, a decision that may have cost her life. George's trial began on November 27, 1999. Since 2009, Greek legal proceedings have been presided over by 3 judges instead of juries, streamlining the justice process. Notably, no defense witnesses appeared during George's hearings. On December 6, the court found him guilty and sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Although it seemed justice had been served, the Greek legal system later faltered. In 2002, George appealed his conviction, claiming he was insane at the time of the murder. His sentence was reduced to 23 years, and he was granted the right to appeal again. By 2007, he was released, and is now reportedly living with a new family in Kavala. The case of Julie Scully remains a heartbreaking tragedy, filled with haunting details of a toxic and manipulative relationship. What began as a seemingly happy marriage devolved into betrayal, abuse, and ultimately murder. Julie's story is not only one of personal loss, but also a reflection of the complex dynamics of love, trust, control, and vulnerability. The media and public continue to revisit the case in search of clarity and justice, but Julie's story will forever stand as a painful reminder of the devastating consequences of emotional manipulation and toxic love.